So I really wanted to start with you basically into sharing your experience. And you talk about seeking deeper knowledge and healing and how that impacted you. And could you go into what originally got you to seek that deeper knowledge and healing and what your experience was like dealing with certain issues in your health that got you into what you're doing today?
Absolutely. Um, well, the reality is I never thought that I would be in the holistic space. I certainly never saw myself as a holistic practitioner in any level, much less running a tech startup company. What brought me here was necessity, right? So this is my experience of, what is arguably a complicated relationship that I've had with the medical and mental health care system. My medical history is likewise somewhat complicated. But ultimately, again, the reason that I find myself so passionate about validating and sharing the holistic modalities that have brought me here today and that I do practice, because I had no idea when I first originally brought myself to our existing healthcare system that these possibilities existed. And ultimately, having truly survived my experience, which I'll get into, I really, my purpose at this point is to illuminate to people not only our inherent possibility as human beings, how we really can redefine what we think is possible, but again, that these safe, effective treatment options exist. They are being validated with scientific data. That is, exactly what I'm working to add to as well. And so originally, when I willingly brought myself to the well, maybe I'll start with where I am currently and then work my way backwards.
I like that.
So I have PTSD, which manifests as dissociation and ADHD. I also have a multitude of autoimmune responses and disorders as a result of, autonomic nervous system trauma, ultimately, a result of trauma, both circumstantial, acute, and medical trauma, the trauma that I incurred while seeking treatment for my original PTSD trauma. So the trauma in combination with the pharmaceutical medications that I was put on were really the catalyst for a lot, like I said, of autoimmune conditions, including diabetes. I've been diagnosed with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. But ultimately, my system ran amok, and what I've learned is that our medical system just is not equipped to treat or understand, or doesn't have the willingness to understand more complicated cases like myself. So working backwards, again, my dissociation really manifested from childhood. I didn't realize that my childhood trauma was manifesting as dissociation, but as I got older, I, to be completely honest, was seeking substance abuse for escaping the trauma that I was experiencing. And originally, as a child, the first time that I was brought to our healthcare system to therapy, it was the first time that I kind of thought to myself, I'm not seeing the Hippocratic oath here. This is really more of a hypocritical system that I'm seeing. First of all, I was, even at 13, I was aware that I was not the root cause of the problems. I was being brought as the problem child, but I understood that there was the system dynamics that were really the issue here. But what was fascinating my therapist at the time, he was so willing to immediately prescribe me really heavy medications, everything from, addictive benzodiazepines to sedatives, antipsychotics, and, I'm a child.
Hmm.
So I realized that this was all just kind of a facade very early on, and that was kind of the seed planted of me having some distrust for our medical system. And, I would have no choice but to continue to show up, but I would flush the medications down the toilet or hide them in other ways. Again, this was my childhood intuition that just knew that like this was completely unnecessary. I am not the issue, and these meds aren't going to do anything. What was interesting was as I would continue to show up, my doctor he was so disconnected and so uninterested in understanding, what was the root cause and me as a patient in general, that he would say, wow, I can really see how the medications are helping you so much. You're getting so much better. And so here I am at like 13, like, okay, like check. Right. And come to find out later that this particular doctor actually was written up in the Bay Area where I'm from for being, far and beyond above any other doctor in the area for receiving kickbacks from pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
So again, my story is not about bashing the medical system because there are absolutely appropriate applications, but this was my early experience of, again, registering how incentivized doctors are by, the pharmaceutical companies ultimately, and how disinterested they seemed in understanding what was really going to work for me as a patient, because I genuinely sought to be happier, to find wellness. That's never changed. So fast forwarding, like I said, I sought substance abuse to self-medicate because the system wasn't providing me effective treatment options. And this is really where, again, I hope to, perhaps serve as a cautionary tale, because this is kind of where things went downhill for me. That original childhood intuition and that understanding that I had of listening to what I knew was true, I was willing now to be diagnosed with whatever the doctor said because I was seeking medications, I was seeking pharmaceuticals, and I'll just be completely honest about that because that was my incentive. Again, I certainly tried to be honest with my doctors. I was always seeking, ways to improve my life, but at the same time, I wasn't thinking too far into the future, and I was absolutely much more preoccupied with self-medicating. And so obviously a repercussion of self-medicating, you're not totally conscious. You're not in a great state of mind to be making decisions. So now I'm 17, 18 years old, and even with my previous experiences in therapy, I wasn't considering a lot beyond the immediate present moment, but I never really stopped to consider what the real repercussions could be of an improper diagnosis. I think that I was naive to believe that, that wouldn't really impact me beyond what I was prescribed. And I have come to find out that that is absolutely not true. So my personal experience is that I was misdiagnosed with mental illness. I take a moment to pause here because, I've also spent multiple months in treatment centers with people who would say like they are properly diagnosed, and whatever your truth is, this is my experience. And I think that it's really important to just identify, because again, I had no idea the repercussions that would result in willingly allowing, somebody else to define me. And I think that that's really one of the dangers of our current medical system is that we are giving so much power to these practitioners, to the doctors, and they really don't have the time or the resources to dive deep with you. And so once you are defined as something, it is very difficult to kind of get yourself out of that hole. And that is the story that we are talking about today. So essentially, I'm moving through the teen years, early adulthood. On the one hand, the only thing that's really kept me grounded and passionate, aside from substance abuse, to be completely honest with you, was culinary. Ever since childhood, I knew that I wanted to be a chef. I lived my dream of going to culinary school. That's how I find myself here in the Napa Valley. And, in so many respects, it really was almost Icarian, right? Like I felt like I was manifesting all of the dreams that I had always envisioned through childhood. I was recruited right out of school, working in Michelin star restaurants as a pastry chef. And it was everything that I wanted. But what they say about the culinary industry is true. It is a difficult and traumatic business. And I used to say, if you're not selling your soul, you're not doing it right. And on the one hand, I felt like it was my soul's purpose and absolute passion, but it was abusive, and especially, as a woman in that field as well. And then there were circumstances that eventually led me to walk out, which is a really difficult decision for me to make, but I was, having a breakdown. There's a lot of factors that, variables that may have led to that, including this kind of mounting dissociation that I'd been suppressing since childhood and didn't have any understanding for. Additionally, all of these pharmaceuticals that I had added into my life. I felt genuinely like my stability was out of my control. And again, in retrospect, I was on a lot of drugs. So I wasn't in a right state of mind. But, once I left my job, I really also felt like I lost my identity. But at the same time, I felt that it was what I had to do for my self-preservation and self-respect. My then boyfriend at the time witnessed the injustice. He left the restaurant that we were working at as well. We actually got married within 3 days. My whole life changed as I'm simultaneously just spiraling downhill mentally, physically. I'm starting to go downhill as well. Just these symptoms are continuing to mount. And, this began a series of doctors that just led me down a worse and worse path. And it started with improper management of the pharmaceuticals that I was prescribed. I mean, again, in retrospect, I was prescribed like 10 Ativan a day as needed. That's a huge amount that's a dangerous amount of benzodiazepines. I mean, it was when I began heavier medications like lithium, for example. I was on that for months before realizing that you're supposed to have blood work done. You're supposed to be monitored on it. None of this was brought up to me. I wasn't aware of any of this. And I trusted the doctors, right? Because I felt like I was out of control. And this is what we're told to do. Bring yourself to go get help. And the doctors told me, you need these medications. And I was at a point where I was willing to try anything. But again, realizing now how dangerously I was prescribed. And again, this is my experience. I happen to have some very irresponsible doctors, and I have experienced true malpractice, which is different than medical negligence. That really is on the doctor. And my path just happened to lead me to multiple doctors that took that route. So regardless, I found myself actually in psychosis at this point. I mean, I'm living a nightmare now. So I've quit my job. I'm skipping over what I like to call a lot of big T and little t traumas that were happening simultaneously. But just speaking to the medical side of it, I, rapidly became the most treatment resistant patient that they'd ever seen. And this is why they were prescribing me just exorbitant amounts of medications and cocktails that, again, were truly dangerous. And because this was an improper diagnosis, because this was not solving any of the root causes, I did not have a positive reaction. My reaction was psychosis. So I became this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? What began as PTSD and trauma was misdiagnosed as mental illness, which led to the pharmaceuticals. Now I am actually in psychosis. And this is where, my medical history gets really muddy and complicated, not only on a personal level, because I was essentially not cognizant for the majority of this experience, but again, the circumstantial trauma that was happening at the same time as my body just being pumped full of all of these toxins resulted in a lot of epigenetic changes and diseases that, again, our current medical system, for example, I'll take diabetes. Even in a hospital setting, if you don't have diabetes genetically, if you're not predisposition, they wouldn't even take my blood sugar when I would come and say, I'm experiencing extreme thirst. I can't see, like, symptoms that you would think were impossible to deny. I can't use my legs. I'm turning blue from the waist down, these things. And because of my medical chart, right? Because I had this mental illness, a doctor would literally not even take out a stethoscope. So this just compounded my trauma of it's seemingly the definition of insanity, right? Bringing myself continuously back to our system because what else was I going to do? Just rapidly deteriorating, sicker and sicker, and consistently met with, it is in your head. That's a very scary and real situation because I was absolutely, dying. Ultimately, I was undiagnosed diabetic for so long that we realized my blood sugar, which is, a normal level, 80 to 100. I had been living at like 800 to perhaps over 1,000 for months before, and again, this is what I have continuously found about our system as well. Our current medical system is only set up to be able to respond in that emergency situation, right? So we need to let your symptoms progress to the point where it's catastrophic, and then we can take action. Then we're going to be able to do something about it. And I'm grateful, right? Because to that effect, Western medicine saved my life. Absolutely. When I was finally diagnosed. But backtracking a little bit, trying to think of where I left myself off. Throughout this time, I guess I'll continue at where I was diagnosed with diabetes. So this was a couple of years of me just getting sicker and sicker, and then ultimately getting this final diagnosis. And at the same time, I was provided an opportunity to leave what was the traumatic situation that was also keeping me so ill, and to start treatment at a mental and behavioral health center. So you still with me at this point? To recap, I am still improperly diagnosed with mental illness. I am properly diagnosed now with diabetes. So at least I'm receiving some sort of medical care, moving in that right direction. And now I'm about to enter a mental and behavioral health program. This is where I had an intimate experience with just how broken our current, especially mental health care system is. Obviously, I've spoken to the medical side of things. You know, the blessing of this is that I did have Medicare, and so I was able to spend 13 months in this treatment center, and which is a really long time. And unfortunately, the reality is, because of the lack of resources and because of the fundamental education of our current system, the majority of people, myself included, were actually continuously more traumatized than when they entered. Because, you know, like myself, you're seeking help when you're at your lowest point, the lowest of lowest points. At the same time, you're expected to somehow be an articulate advocate for yourself, which is completely unreasonable. And, you know, my situation, I was very fortunate. Most people, depending on your insurance, I mean, some people were fighting for 7 days, 14 days maximum to get better. Nothing about their circumstance had changed. The whole system, you know, from the beginning is incentivized by the insurance companies, and, you know, it impacts the patients, you know, when you feel like this is your last chance for help and it's not going to happen for you. That's a very dark place to be. And that's, again, why I'm so passionate today about bringing the modalities to our medical system that helped me. So to summarize, the therapist that I was provided was trained in Buddhism. He actually had his bachelor's in Buddhism. I didn't know that that was a thing that you can do. You can. And this was, you know, kind of, I look at it as divine intervention, because this is really where the first seeds were planted for me to be exposed to Eastern philosophy. Buddhism was completely new to me. But I had just, you know, survived this near-death experience, truly. And, you know, we were speaking before we began about neuroplasticity. And I've spoken to some other people who have had near-death experiences as well. And it's so interesting how the world works, because now I find myself working with technology that is based upon a near-death experience and can replicate it. But the neuroplasticity that I experienced after all of that trauma, after my near-death experience, was so profound that, you know, in retrospect, it was really easy for me to adapt a whole new way of life, because I was essentially starting from scratch. I really, you know, mentally, physically felt very infantile, but also, I mean, just fertile to regain myself. So this Buddhist therapist, in the early stages of my treatment, also helped me to identify, you know, what really was going on, that I was having extreme bouts of dissociation. I learned what that was. And at the same time, I was provided techniques like meditation. You know, part of this program was doing things like CBT, DBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy. And, you know, these are fundamental tools that I honestly feel like every human being should go through at some point in their life. I feel like we should all go back to school and just get a tune-up, and there's no shame in that. So while I'm kind of reconstructing what it is to be a human, and adopting, you know, these new holistic ideas and way of viewing things, I became conscious again. You know, I had lived truly years out of my body. My dissociation through all of this had just separated me from myself completely. And as I began to, you know, use these meditation tools and techniques, I realized, like, you know, I don't think that this story applies to me. I don't think that this is really right. Like, I think that we made a mistake, people. Like, I don't think that I'm actually this diagnosis. And that is that's a tough pill to swallow for any doctor. And, truly, I would say that most doctors would be unwilling to entertain that thought. I had, my team of medical professionals that were coaching me to essentially lower my expectations for life, because this is it. You are going to be on pharmaceutical medications for the rest of your life. I had lost my independence, my freedom. I was truly a dependent adult. I was stripped of my rights. I was stripped of the respect of the community. So I was basically told no. That's not possible. You're absolutely, properly diagnosed. But again, I'm fortunate because I had enough time, I was allowed enough time where my therapist saw behind the veil, right? Like saw that there was perhaps some fertile soil here. And so essentially the way that I had to bring myself out of this, what I call being medicalized through this misdiagnosis, was in secrecy. I had to kind of start my own covert operation, N of one. And, I tried to be as forthcoming with my treatment team as they would allow me to. But essentially, my therapist didn't want to be lying to the doctor as much as possible. So he's like, I believe in what you're doing, but I'm not going to tell you to do it. Here's the DSM. For those who don't know, this is the manual that defines every mental illness, and ultimately was only truly created by a bunch of old white guys who are trying to give codes for insurance. It is not a way to define humanity. But regardless, so I'm I'm given in secrecy a copy of the DSM, and I'm armed with my continuous glucose monitor from my diabetes. And I basically have to do my own case study of titrating myself off of the medications, which is not easy. It is dangerous. I do not, suggest this to anybody, but this was the only opportunity that I really had. And then to come back and say, not only is this reflected in my blood sugar, and also let's look at, all the times that you're dismissing my emotions, like, oh, turns out my blood sugar is like over 400 at these times. And, there's other factors here that could explain beyond it just me being broken. Or it must be this proper diagnosis. And also, once I had successfully, taken myself off of essentially all of these medications, and I had still, remained trusted, it took months, but I did change the minds of my treatment team. I did successfully, through so many months, so many hours. It was not an easy experience, but at the end of the day, what was once defined as impossible, what I certainly thought was impossible, became possible. They changed their minds. They saw that there was the possibility to redefine what was going on with the patient. And this was especially difficult because where I was in treatment is in Vallejo, California. And anyone who's familiar with Vallejo, California knows that this is an incredibly underserved, impoverished and, struggling community. The resources are as slim as any. And the responsibility, these doctors, first of all, were on many of the same medications. I later found out that I was, not so different, you and I, but the responsibilities that they were, they were seeing 20, 30 patients a day. It was a joke, truly. So anyway, at the end of the day, I I was afforded, you know, my identity again. I was validated. That's huge. And I was, you know, I was reinstilled with all of this faith. I was so excited. I was like, all right, like I'm actually, you know, PTSD with strong dissociation. Like, let's attack this now. Like, still have faith in our system. And unfortunately, even when I was properly diagnosed, what I learned about PTSD specifically, and again, this is bringing us ultimately to the work that I do today. Anyone who has PTSD, no matter the root of your trauma, I happen to be in treatment with a lot of veterans, and so I do have a special connection and bond with that demographic. But for anybody that was seeking treatment, because of the limited resources, the lack of time that I've talked about, we were not encouraged to process our trauma, which is like the worst thing that you can do for somebody with PTSD. It's like, oh, just shove that cork and keep it locked down even more, because I just can't open Pandora's box with you because we're not going to be able to close it. And, you know, ultimately, this is leading to suicide. This is leading to prescription abuse. This is harming so many individuals, and myself included. And ultimately, this is the reason that I decided to leave treatment, because I realized that this system was not going to allow me what I needed to process and to get better, which was disappointing. But at the same time, it was the first time since this whole downward spiral of truly living a nightmare where I realized, like, I have faith in myself again. I trust myself more than the system. This is the first time that I had felt that since childhood. And I had the courage and the confidence to leave and to seek, you know, a better life for myself, because I believed that there had to be better options out there, but I had no idea what those were at all. So blindly, I graduated myself eventually from the program, and it was shortly after that, you know, again, thank you to these Buddhist roots, I had been practicing yoga through this time. My yoga community supported me as I left my treatment program. From there, I was introduced to a multitude of other holistic modalities, but specifically this technology, Lucid number 3. And so it was through a fellow yogi that we were actually going to start a CBD dog treat business together. And the restrictions and all of that is very complicated. And so he was like, you know, I just completely out of the blue. He's like, I have this technology and I'm kind of trying to start a business. Would you be interested in working with me? I had no idea what I'm signing up for. I barely have my life together, right? Like I've just graduated this program. And I experienced this technology, and then I'm happy to pause and elaborate on really what this technology is. But I experienced it for the first time. And while I had no idea what I was experiencing, I knew it was potent. I knew it was powerful and it was effective. And truly, you know, since like yoga, meditation, I had not experienced anything that actually shifted me into any sort of, you know, effective state of healing. And, you know, the tools that I had received from the program were helpful, but at a certain point I had felt like I had plateaued. And truly, like the same week that I'm introduced to this technology, the same person also basically starts encouraging me to microdose. So for me personally, I had never considered bringing any medicine back into my life after just having detoxed off of all of these pharmaceuticals. It took a lot of convincing, actually, but Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, came out again, like right at this time. And that was given to me. And I'm like, all right, universe, here's the validation of why this might be a good reason for me, for my PTSD. It's going into all the details of the efficacy of psychedelic science. And I really took that as kind of a sign. Come to find out that this technology that I had been exposed to is in itself a substance-free psychedelic. And so I really, all of a sudden, all signs are pointing to psychedelics in some form or another, which is interesting because prior to this whole near-death experience, I'm no stranger to psychedelics, but I didn't know the meaning of microdose. It was macrodose all the time, every time. A much different perspective on what psychedelics were. Now, truly my incentive is looking for effective tools for healing. And it was, it turned out to be an opportunity that my brain needed to open these neuroplastic states and have access to my consciousness in a way that I can really engage and therefore, dictate or like reprogram my brain. And the dissociation previously just wouldn't allow me to access that. So at the same time that I'm kind of rediscovering psychedelics in this whole new, much more responsible perspective, I agreed to go get trained by our US distributor on this technology, because I'm like, I don't know what just happened to me, but let's find out more. And from there, again, once I was officially trained and I realized like, oh, wow, we are effectively bringing a substance-free alternative to this incredibly promising psychedelic science. Like, this is incredible. Like, yes, I'm on board. First of all, me and my people need this. I need to bring this back to the broken system that I just left. This is what I'm looking for. This is how I'm going to serve all the people that I left behind, right? And all the people that all my friends, my peers that don't have effective solutions and that are suffering. And so in that way, that's the universe, right? That is fated, I feel. But that is also, how I have found myself working with this technology. And, essentially what I realized after being trained is like, from my experience, I understood scientific validation is crucial. You have to validate these technologies. So that was what was missing here in the US. We had global research that was validating our technology as a substance-free psychedelic alternative, but nothing using US populations. And my whole mission, right, is to bring these modalities into the infrastructure of a new medical paradigm. So we have to have sensitive US populations validated. And so that's where we are today. That is how I have kind of carved out my path within our technologies community. And that is what I am actively accomplishing now.
Awesome. And I want to get into that technology, but first I want to, kind of step back to your story, because it seemed like you're in this, what we like to call a vicious disease cycle, where you're kind of always spiraling. And even if you address one side a little bit, let's say the biochemical, you're missing the mind side. So that triggers the spiritual side and then triggers the biochemical side again. And you go in this vicious disease cycle. Unless you can address all three, you'll always be there spiraling in a sense. And it seems that it was really started with misdiagnosis. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
I wrote a paper one, or an article, blog post, you could say, because I'm not a writer really, but it was called The Death of the Diagnosis. And everything I learned in medicine and all the doctors I spoke to were that if you don't have the diagnosis, you can't do anything for a patient. You
Mm.
really need to give them, you need to label them to even take the first step in treatment. And, then I learned all about integrative holistic medicine, alternative, everything we do here at Innovative Medicine over the years. And it came to me that the diagnosis isn't really necessary. If you treat the patient as the patient, you're Jessica, we have a protocol for Jessica and your unique, circumstance, then that's just as good, if not way better than trying to label and then placing you in a grouping with everyone else with that label and throwing the same things at you until something works down the line. We'll go through A, and then clinicals have shown maybe B works, maybe C works, maybe D works. All along the way, as you said, you're just getting more medications, you're switching it up, they're going higher maybe because lower didn't work. And that's usually how you go about it. If lower doesn't work, let's throw more at you, right? It's quantity versus quality there. So I wanted to get your feelings on this kind of a new approach, if it were to say, do you think medicine should just get rid of the diagnosis altogether? Especially when it comes to mental health, let's say, because I feel like that's really misunderstood and truly misdiagnosed because you don't have biochemical readings all the time to kind of substantiate your finding and say, oh, we got it here. Look at this paper. It shows you have Lyme disease, right? Or it shows you have this or diabetes or anything. Would you agree that diagnoses are a little bit, too over kind of, pushed on doctors to make treatments versus really understanding the patient?
I could not agree more. And Casper, it's honestly, it is healing, and it is so encouraging to even have the opportunity to verbalize and have this discussion, right? Because I firmly believe, again, the diagnosis, the only diagnosis that matters is what you are, essentially diagnosing yourself to the capacity of just understanding your experience. Your opinion and your system, like you said, it's completely unique. This doctor, what my mistake and what I hope to kind of, again, serve as caution for people who have lost faith in themselves for potentially seemingly very valid reasons. If we can live in a society, and this is really the new medical paradigm that I'm truly working to change, but if we can encourage each other and ourselves to reinstill that faith in ourselves, our trust, our connection to intuition, this is nature's recalibration tool that we inherently have. We've got this wiring literally in our brain for our intuitive connection. And like any muscle, you have to foster that. You have to practice listening to yourself. And that is exactly, the mistake that I made. I believed that the medical system knew best. And it's honestly barbaric, our actual understanding of how some of these pharmaceuticals truly work. We're so misled, and ultimately, at the end of the day, what is the reason behind that? It is the incentives of our current medical system, which is a pharmaceutical incentive and a profit incentive over the patient. And that is really what we need to reconstruct. And I do firmly believe that it begins with, I love the phrase, the death of the diagnosis, because, like I said before, what is the DSM other than a vehicle to be able to code for insurances at the end of the day?
Yeah.
When we define what is even happening in the present moment, and I'll speak from my own experience, I think that it's also really important to remember, and this is what meditative practices really, I think, allow us to do, but anything that is consciousness expanding, which again is truly the opposite of the paradigm we find ourselves in now. The paradigm right now is to suppress, is to numb, is to make, ultimately people a shell of themselves in these pharmaceuticals, especially. when we remain open to the possibility that of impermanence, right? That even if, yes, you know, you can actively be ill in all of these ways right now. Yes, I am actively, you know, insulin dependent currently, but I've really tried to adopt new language, even when I'm speaking about myself and my current system, which I get flack for. It seems like denial to some of my treatment team even now, but I leave room for the possibility that, again, you know, this is a result of epigenetic trauma and things can change. You know, we are so much more like reptiles or amphibians that can regenerate than these cut and dried, you know, dichotomized, siloed definitions. So
Yeah.
yeah, I truly believe that there's a lot of danger in relying on defining someone. And again, ultimately, what I realized is the power that is carried when you allow somebody else to define you, right? Because I all of a sudden was experiencing very real medical symptoms, and I wasn't receiving care because I was immediately dismissed by the diagnosis. So I nearly lost my life to a wrong definition.
Mm.
And you know, I firmly believe that I survived my experience and everything happens for a reason. Again, it has led me exactly to where I feel I need to be today. But I am one individual, right, that was almost lost to the system. I mean, very truly, my family was just kind of like reorganizing life. Like, okay, we have a daughter that is now a vegetable, you know, and she's going to be dependent for the rest of her life. I mean, we're just coming to terms because that's what the entire reality society was forcing us to believe, and there was no hope. It was not going to change. This is the best case scenario. And, you know, at the end of the day, not only have I regained my life, but, you know, turns out I actually, you know, am so blessed to work with this technology that really has opportunity and solutions. And again, I'm one individual. Imagine if we start helping all of these people who are lost to our system and still currently suffering, to regain their true purpose. You know, how exponentially quickly we can catalyze and transform, you know, truly the universe.
Yeah.
It's, yeah.
Well, your example is you know, an instance of how resilient human body is, human mind is, and how it truly is a self-healing organism. We are. So it's really, you know, fascinating to hear you go through all this, where you are in this vicious disease cycle of sorts, misdiagnosis, over medicated, in such a dire state, really, and able to still come out of it, right? Whereas others may have even written you off and said, you're on these for the rest of your life. You need more, more, more. And only with a change in belief system, these new things such as understanding, meditation, mindfulness, you started to lift yourself out of that. And I think that changed your belief system and triggered something in your mind. Now, I wanted to ask you if you bought into the concept, maybe you heard of New Germanic medicine, that basically states an illness begins in the mind and then the body follows. And that's where a lot of this starts, even when you look at cancer. Dr. Hammer's work, who started New Germanic medicine, basically stated there was some emotional trigger in there. There was something in the mind that happened, and a trauma, usually a death, you know, some kind of, you know, someone in the family loss, or some kind of real trauma to the mind that then resulted in a biochemical action later on. And he actually showed a lot of brain, you know, scans and all these things and correlated that. Do you buy into that concept?
You know, I think that that is so fascinating. Absolutely. And it's interesting because this has taken a long time for me to really digest, and ultimately I think that it was impeding my healing. There's so much patient shame when you become so ill. And you know, I'll speak to my experience. I carried so much guilt and shame for, allowing this to happen to me. This is how I internalized it. Allowing myself to be misdiagnosed, allowing myself to take these medications, allowing myself to have addictive tendencies that brought me into this whole mess to begin with, and to seek the misdiagnosis. It's not, I so frequently would be discouraged when I was told, your experience is psychosomatic, it's in your head. And the reality is, like, psychosomatic is I do believe, like, absolutely, it does start in the mind. It can absolutely manifest from, our thoughts, from specific traumas. Absolutely. We're so sensitive and complex, but ultimately, again, it just speaks to how our unique system is digesting our unique experience, right? Like how our nervous system is interpreting what's happening to us. And the same thing can happen to two different people, and it can have completely different results, right? Like one person can be diseased as a result, and the other person, seemingly fine. So it's what I have come to at the end of the day is finding the ability to surrender, and allowing myself as the patient to not necessarily need to know why things are happening initially, because I really feel that just kind of led me further away from the actual healing and coming back into homeostasis, where, again, this is a result of our medical system, but we're taught, specialists siloing your symptoms, defining you by a diagnosis, and really it is the ego to be so presumptuous that's like, oh, I know exactly what's happening to you, and we're going to operate, very strongly down that path in a way that can change your life forever. Where I have found the most success and also the least resistance from our current system is really just listening to what my body is trying to tell me with my symptoms, looking at it all as information. And then again, trusting my intuition to do what I think might work and seeing if it does. And, again, ultimately being an N of one study, and just witnessing, what is working for me, because what works for me today may very well change as well. And that's why, the necessity of the future of medicine must be personalized medicine, because not only are we all unique individual snowflakes, but we're constantly changing. And look at COVID as an example. Our individual needs have severely changed, and now so many people are seeking this very same broken system that I've been talking about, that never have struggled in this way before. And unfortunately, our system is not equipped to meet these demands currently, which is, at the same time, I say that, but what I really truly feel is that we're witnessing the evolution of truly a new holistic paradigm that, we're seeing, like I said before, the validation of modalities like psychedelic science, breakthrough. When's the last time that you heard the term breakthrough in mental health, right? Like, to have any sort of effective treatment is needed now more than ever. And it's happening. It really is happening. And again, that's why, in my personal experience, to be able to then additionally bring a substance-free alternative and modality in combination with the appropriate substance-full versions, it's like, as long as we can continue to validate and meet the current medical system where it's at, practitioners, physicians, they're ready for change. They're ready to, stop harming their patients. they're hungry for, things like, even sound healing coming into the hospitals and frequency healing, things like that. I mean, it is a new era. And so I think it's really important for us to remain positive, of course, but to really witness that true change is happening. And again, there's also forced change on the system as a result of things like COVID. So.
Yeah, no, change is definitely happening. You see it all around, but I still hear those stories like what you said of a doctor telling someone that it's all in their head and then sending them away. And I just cringe at that, because even if it is in your head, which can be absolutely wrong, that's almost like a cop out sometimes, but maybe it is, why would you not still help the patient? It's as if the mind and this idea of psychology is completely foreign. You are a machine. That's what we look at you as. And if the parts are fine, then that little thing, that mind you talk about, we don't really care. And it's like, wow, it's what makes us human. It is literally probably the most important thing about us, our minds and that ability to have those thoughts and be a conscious being. And yet, it's all in your head. Go, do that, or just take this pill and maybe you'll shut up. It's like, wow, have we really gotten that lazy in medicine to say something like that? And it's like, and I cringe because again, it's wow, we are so dehumanizing ourselves.
Yeah. No, thank you for saying that. Absolutely. And, ultimately that is so much at the root of it. What I realized is this system is not trying to find solutions. It's not trying to stimulate the patient. There is no engagement in, how to really heal. And, so what is this facade? What is this dance that we're doing? Ultimately, again, it comes down to the incentives, right? And they are not aligned with patient health or advocacy. Absolutely. So currently.
Well, I know our incentives are to actually help and heal. And that's why I'm excited to jump into this next whole, topic, which is what I'm having you on to talk about Lucid Holistics, Lucia number 3, tech. When I hear words like techdelic and psychedelic science, my ears perk up and I'm like, tell me more. So tell us more about exactly what Lucia number 3, the company you helped start, Lucid Holistics, what's it all about? What are we really doing with this technology that is this techdelic psychedelic science?
Wonderful. I love it. Beautiful. Let's start with what is Lucia number 3. Breaking down exactly what is a techdelic. So Lucia number 3, just to give you a visual to take you on this journey, you can imagine almost like the light that is swung over you when you go to the dentist, right? So from a hardware side, we're looking at a combination of LEDs and halogen bulb and nothing else coming out of the machine. So solid and flickering white light coming out of the machine itself. And what this is doing is it's gently entraining the brain using specific frequencies into a deeply meditative state. So essentially, as the user, what you're doing is your eyes are closed the entire time. And as your brain is receiving the solid and flickering white light through the optic nerve, but actually we have photoreceptor cells all over our body, and I personally use the light in a myriad of ways, not just the classic way, but speaking traditionally. Your eyes are closed, you're receiving the solid and flickering white light, again, gently entraining you to this meditative state. Where it starts to become a little trippy and psychedelic is where we introduce the second stimuli of music. And so in our experience, you add music, and as the two stimuli combine in the brain, it's inducing what's called synesthesia. So anyone who's experienced psychedelics is familiar with synesthesia. This is the blending of the senses, essentially. In our experience, naturally, it's sound. Seeing sound is the result. But this can, you can hear people speaking from a psychedelic experience, like, I could taste color. All of this is synesthesia. So what ends up resulting behind your closed eyelids is this beautiful, truly psychedelic experience of patterns and fractals, interestingly enough, sacred geometry is what just inherently comes through us as the beautiful, brilliant human beings that we are. And I've actually, been able to work with holistic professionals that can really help me, and color psychologists, all sorts of different people who can help dissect, for the individual, what really is being excavated and coming to the surface, so that we can really have a greater understanding of what your subconscious is really telling you. But so essentially, again, all that the user is doing is closing their eyes. So what I find just on the surface, before diving into how this truly is a substance-free psychedelic, just speaking to the necessity of and the benefits of meditation, right? I mean, like, we've all heard, especially now in COVID, like, download your meditation app, all the benefits of mindfulness. It can help pretty much everything that ails you, depending on who you ask. And ultimately, to be honest, I have found it to be one of the most transformative things in my life, absolutely. But so many people, right, are like, nah, I just can't meditate. I'm not a meditator. Or the stigma that's attached to it. Even as a self-proclaimed hippie, when I first was introduced to this technology, I didn't feel like I was enough of a hippie to really even like belong to this community, right? And so where I think that technology really has this advantage is that it can bridge this disconnect between, what is arguably the existing psychedelic culture, which is strongly connected in a lot of ways to the new age and kind of more hippie scene, if you will, and include everyone, right? Not only a wider spectrum of patients for psychedelic science as a substance-free alternative, which again, I'll get into, but there's been nothing more rewarding than watching somebody be able to let go and just actually find that meditative state effortlessly. Like, they typically, if you have 40 years to dedicate to, learning Zen Buddhism and, becoming a monk and honing that practice, then you can absolutely, reach that place. And what we're providing isn't a shortcut, right? But it's a tool that allows you to access that state, yes, in seconds instead of 40 years. But the way that our brain works is, once you have been exposed to an experience, that is your path to be able to re-access it, right? And so once we have broken through and we have our own subjective experience of a meditative state, it is infinitely easier for you to naturally bring yourself, with or without our technology, back to that place. So I think that just in itself, even just with one experience, can be so transformative for people.
And you say, this helps with people with PTSD, correct? Because that and trauma are the two main kind of factors that you looked at. Can you go into that a little bit and what you found? Because, I do find that so many people, and there is almost like a stigma around PTSD. Do you actually have it? Are you labeled this? Is it only for veterans? Are we just becoming, too sensitive? You have so many people saying so many things. And again, it's so personalized. And it is so, your own, whether or not you're going through the trauma, and the trauma is always, it's your own that you go through, and you only process it in your own way. So how is this helping with that, with people who may have PTSD, different traumas? What's the science behind that?
Right on. So, and because I personally, my PTSD manifests in the form of dissociation, essentially, what our technology is doing is inducing a dissociative state. And so my initial reaction, like I said before, I knew whatever was happening was very effective, but I had no idea what to make of it. And the reality is, now that I actually work with one of the inventors, he was recently explaining to me, we didn't realize how powerful this technology was. And so specifically when you're talking about PTSD, it's really important to to start slow, but to not dismiss the experience like I almost did. My first experience was, and I think that this really speaks to, how we mirror the psychedelic experience as well, because both substance-free or substance-full, the importance of set and setting in your experience is going to dictate whether this is a positive or negative neuroplastic experience, right? Because with PTSD or with trauma, it is essentially, inducing that neuroplasticity, but often, it's ingraining very negative beliefs, negative patterns. This is what happens when people are having flashbacks. You're going back into those deeply ingrained grooves and those connections that have been made, not only, so often inappropriately, and that's why, you'll have a traumatic response to perhaps flickering light, or, loud noises, especially for those who've been in service. But, in my experience, again, these improper connections manifested in an autoimmune response. So using this technology specifically, it's really important. And this is why I've focused one of my target populations for our feasibility studies to be using not only veterans, but specifically senior veterans, because I want to prove the efficacy on the most sensitive populations, within this demographic, because there is so much potential. So let's start, I myself being, a really a problem patient, but a complicated case, right? Like so often we who seemingly, need perhaps the most help are dismissed because it's too much, or we don't know what to do with you, we don't have the resources, whatever. So my whole perspective is let's take the most sensitive populations and start there and then work our way backwards. So for specifically veterans, one of the main things that we have to be sensitive about is, our technology is using stroboscopic stimulation, that's solid and flickering white light. So that very well may be specifically traumatic to some people. And that really just speaks to, again, like the importance of this being a completely individualized experience. You may not even know the subconscious trauma that you have. And so no matter who you are, what population, we are always, starting at the slowest basic level, working our way up gradually in response to how you the user are reporting your experience. So to answer your question, using this as a tool for PTSD, I was, after I left treatment, I had no control over my dissociation. All of a sudden, once I experienced this technology, I had this container where I understood that I could willingly put myself into this dissociative state. It was gonna happen. And then I could retrain my nervous system response. I can retrain and be conscious because of the frequencies, right, that this technology is bringing me to, because of the nature of the meditative state, of dampening our, default mode network, which is the ego, where this mind chatter resides, that, you hear people in this ethereal way being able to let go of when they get on their pillow and they reach meditation. But again, this technology is just inducing that effortlessly. And all of a sudden I, had agency over something that medically I was told, really, like, you're not going to have control over this without medication, right? And so for myself and my specific dissociation, that has been, probably the most impactful opportunity that because it is such an effective dissociative state, because that's the brilliancy of technology. It really can just be super fine-tuned. This was the only controlled environment that I had, encountered to be able to use it in this way. And even if we're working with those who do have specific triggers around, say, explosive, solid and flickering white light, you can still use just the halogen without the combination of the flickering LEDs. And this in and of itself is still an opportunity to induce that parasympathetic state, that state of calm relaxation, and just respite, which is ultimately, at the end of the day, what PTSD requires is a disruption of these really deeply ingrained patterns. And that's where you can have an opportunity to then rewrite a new response. So, the majority of, especially veterans right now, are on, SSRIs, they're on pain medications. There's all sorts of medical contraindications that exclude them from the psychedelic experience, which has, MAPS has shown such incredible validation as a breakthrough technology. But again, what about the population that has all of these contraindicating medical conditions? This is where I, am seeking to bring our technology in and serve them.
Very cool. Have you ever thought about combining this with other technology, or I should say other techniques even, and procedures, supplement, anything like EMDR or even NAD plus? Because I know those two separately have been shown to work positively on PTSD patients. But of course, I always believe in the synergy and comprehensiveness of things, personalizing, of course, but sometimes going with those different angles. Have you looked into that?
Absolutely. And, I think that ultimately, again, identifying what resonates with each unique individual and combining those, like you said, for the synergistic effect is going to be what provides the greatest therapeutic outcome. I myself, prior to this technology, had tried EMDR, and I haven't tried them in combination. I love that concept, but kind of in the same vein, I'm super excited about, there's all sorts of different technologies that once we can get our hands on the general public again, I'm really excited to start these collaborations. For example, using things like binaural beats or incorporating other forms of frequency healing. That could even be, sound healing, like you're saying, incorporating EMDR specifically prior to our light session. I think, we've experimented with substituting the music component for like binaural beats, which is going to, incorporate more frequencies. And in the experience itself, that can actually be a little bit muddying and complicated for the brain, and it can kind of take away from the efficacy of the experience. But when we combine these modalities, and I'll throw like yoga in here as well, like so many opportunities before and after the experience. What you're doing, you're setting an intention, first of all, and I think that can really powerfully be done. Like, for example, with specific frequencies and binaural beats prior to a session, you're charging your subconscious, and you're gaining clarity for yourself as well, because the more that you have intention for what you're doing, absolutely, you can just show up and have a relaxed experience. But if we're talking about really transforming your human experience, your lifestyle, changing our behaviors, it does require that intention. And like I said before, same with the psychedelic experience, that set and setting is going to make or break your therapeutic outcome. So when we combine these other technologies, modalities, whether they be modern or ancient, when the light goes to work and does its magic, you've already planted such strong channels and intentions that I've witnessed for myself and for other people. The results are powerful.
It's funny you bring that up, because I had two guests recently talking about different therapies, one from biocharger, one from quantum resonance crystal bed, that both said part of the whole healing process and part of the therapy is absolutely setting an intention while you're going through the therapy. And that's something so many people, even when we tell people, it's kind of like, yeah, just let it happen to me, right? I don't need to do that. That's very woo-woo. And Yeah, it sounds positive, but then you have those patients that literally did it, that sat there, set the intention while, in these frequency energy modalities, and just came out the other side like, wow, that really was shifting for me. That truly was therapeutic and healing. Can you go into that a little bit? Why is it so important to set intentions as you're going through any healing process?
Absolutely. And I'll start by saying I myself was a skeptic, even as a self-proclaimed hippie, who does yoga, I still, when I heard like these specific frequencies are supposed to induce these emotional states, like, okay, if, this is just our current society. If we can't see it, we're very much inclined not to believe it. And that's, there is a leap of faith that I will say I was only really willing to take because I was desperate to find effective tools, right? If I hadn't been in a state where I needed to heal, I don't think that I ever would have entertained these. And I certainly would not have placed, my faith in the possibility in the same way. Having said that, I look at somebody like my brother. He's a sound engineer. He has no meditative practice. He is not a hippie. And, like most people, when I introduced this concept of intention, he pretty much dismissed it. And at the same time, we're setting a subconscious intention, whether we're realizing it or not. If you don't intentionally set what you would like to have the outcome to be, whatever your natural self, monologue is, your mind chatter, that's setting the intention for you. And if you don't have a super positive breeding ground, which, let's be real, like not a lot of us are walking around with no worries. And especially now, circumstances can leave you in a very stressed out state. So if we don't take that opportunity to write our own story, then our brain and our subconscious mind are just going to work with what they've been given and what they already know. That's just, if you understand how the brain works, then you can meet it where it's at, right? So in a neuroplastic state, both the psychedelic experience and with our light, one of the key components here is that you're simultaneously activating multiple areas of the brain at the same time. And so additionally, a way to really amplify this, and again, it's going to resonate differently with everybody, is manipulating the five senses into this set and setting and the intention that we're talking about. And you don't need to understand why rosemary makes you, joyful or you have these certain associations. If you enjoy something, if something brings you to the state that you're trying to get to, that's really all that you need to know. And then when we take these moments to prioritize ourselves and to be mindful, and even just in those quick moments of considering, if you're willing to look through a few different smells before your experience, for example, and decide which one you like best, even in those moments, you're having an internal monologue that you may not be registering, but all of it is information. And again, we can leverage this information to set up an environment that's going to set us up for the ultimate success. And that's everybody's personal choice, right? Just like with a workout, how much energy you want to put into it is how much you're going to get out of it. And I think that a blessing of being in a situation like myself, where you need to get the most out of it that you can when you are at rock bottom, that really is where I found a willingness that I never had before. And that, is really a salient point that I want to, just plant the seed for people when they're struggling with finding that willingness, right? Because that's ultimately, you can say like, that's all you need is the willingness to believe in the possibility. And ultimately, arguably that is true, but so much easier said than done, right? I mean, to actually affect real change, which is what we're talking about, true healing. So it's these windows of neuroplasticity, it's these catalysts for altered states of consciousness. And like I said before, on a scientific level, what's happening here is quieting that default mode network, that mind chatter that dictates what you think and you believe, and the limiting beliefs that we've constructed based on our experience. These are, both psychedelics and our substance-free technology have reinstilled that opportunity for willingness and faith in the whole procedure again, when, I have found myself, exhausted by all of this. I too have to refuel my tank in this healing process, because it's been, years, and you lose steam. And without these neuroplastic technologies, I don't know that I could just convince myself to just keep going, right? So I think that it provides an opportunity that people just really don't think is possible. And that's where, again, the promise of having this substance-free alternative for the 95% of people who wouldn't qualify currently for psychedelic therapy, for example, it widens the spectrum of people that we can bring this same science to.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and to do that substance free. And what I think of when I hear things like Lucia number 3 and others, that's truly, I think, on the cutting edge of medicine, is that this is truly an information reprogramming therapy. And everything starts with information. And like you said, we have these limiting beliefs that are just running, these programs running in our head. And then they cascade down into our biology and everything else that continues down into symptoms, into disease usually. And this is where it all starts, really. It's like we got this CPU in here, and it is with virus, with bad software, no updates or anything. So when you think about it, it's not that you're trying to go at the lower level of things like the symptoms and correct those, because that doesn't make sense. You're going straight to it and reprogramming, giving it the information so that everything else, takes care of itself. It gets back to self-healing. And that's where I think the future is, not in stronger chemicals, but things that can actually provide information that is correct and reprogram you so that everything else falls back into place and functions properly.
I couldn't agree with you more there, Casper. Again, and that's what's so unique about our technology as well, is that it really is rooted in the wisdom of nature, right? Which is to remove this presumptuous plan of attack that we have currently, which is to, again, like we've been talking about, diagnose, treat the symptoms, assume that, we understand so far beyond what we actually do, and really just allowing our natural ability to come back to homeostasis. This is something that the current medical system is not taught to believe. So how can we expect patients to believe in their ability to heal themselves when the system itself is not only not set up to encourage that, but ultimately set up to distrust the patient, right? And I think that if we're talking about creating a new medical paradigm that is focused on these holistic modalities, it's really about reinstilling our trust in ourselves, our trust in the system, and fostering a relationship that just doesn't exist currently. But this analogy that you use about updating our system, first of all, it's applicable to every human, right? It's not just those who are seeking help because they're, quote, ill. It's the practitioners as well. And that is, the other side of my focus, is not only bringing this to the patients who are suffering in the present moment with a focus on advocacy, safety, but, bringing this to the practitioners as well, because I am not only a firsthand experience of the repercussions of what can happen in true malpractice situations, but the efficacy of my treatment, the decisions that these doctors are making that, again, truly dictate the course of people's lives. I have shared with you the ramifications of one doctor's diagnosis and definition of me. if these practitioners are not utilizing the same self-care, because again, we are all just humans healing humans. We all have the same hardware that we're running, and we all need to update it. And the only way that we can truly update it is to effectively reach these meditative states in whatever vehicle that is. But this is the way, like you said, to not only clear away the junk, but to reprogram intentionally with updated information. And if we don't create the expectation for practitioners to be implementing this form of self-care, it's not gonna happen, because they're already overrun, they're already under-resourced, we're already experiencing the ramifications. But if we're looking at creating systemic change that is going to be sustainable, we have to stop, we need to dissolve this hierarchy that's been created, right, between healer and ill and the practitioner and the patient, and restore the understanding that we are all unified in our human experience. And that's where, the ethical component comes in, specifically, as we're talking about scaling psychedelic therapy, which again, so promising. We need to consider how, there's never been a more important domain, in my opinion, than an altered state of consciousness when you're talking about instilling ethics and patient safety. And I think that the only way as a human being to really understand the responsibility, specifically as a practitioner, that you have in inducing these incredibly vulnerable altered states is to have some sort of firsthand experience. I don't think that, I think it's just as presumptuous to assume that you can get the gist without having some sort of reference yourself, just as it is to assume that you can properly define an individual and diagnose them. And so this is where, I'm working with the current infrastructure that has created, such an incredible pathway for psychedelic science to continue and research to be a validated modality, here to stay. I'm bringing, the substance-free version for all of the practitioners that ethically, religiously, for whatever reasons, don't want to ingest a substance, but at the same time feel called to serve this space. And additionally, because our technology doesn't require any of the same credentials, or, a lot of things that, like for myself, prevent me from really pursuing a career in psychosis and psychedelic therapy. I don't have the time or the resources to dedicate to that path. However, with our technology now, and especially again, working with this current infrastructure with the trusted and responsible pioneers truly of the space, like MAPS, like the volunteer projects, like Zendo Project, we can take our existing light community and provide a space for all of the people. I would say that the majority of society is still really unaware of psychedelics, don't have, a personal connection, but the more that it's catching fire, right? A lot of people are called to serve in some way because it's effective. And now we're providing an opportunity to really, widen the biodiversity, not only of patients, but of practitioners as well. And if we're talking about building that trust, it requires seeing people like you as a practitioner if you're going to willingly bring yourself into this vulnerable and altered state of consciousness. I think it's fundamental. And, again, imperative if we're talking about really creating a new paradigm, breaking away from what was rooted in this DSM that, again, was created around a table of older white gentlemen.
Totally. Now, let me ask you, because I'm really curious about this, and you talk about experiences. Have you had users of the Lucia number 3 who have also microdosed or maybe gone through medicinal journeys and other rituals that are similar and been able to give you a comparison?
Absolutely. So actually, this is one of the key interests of one of our inventors is the combination, right, of microdosing and our technology. So both in combination at the same time and as kind of an adjunct therapy to an existing microdose protocol, I have firsthand experience and I've witnessed many clients as well. So here's, first of all, I will say that they play beautifully together. Generally, this, it's all coming back to, your responsibility and your intention. So just like any, substance-full experience, we're not looking to just combine things for the sake of getting high, right? Or shifting our consciousness without any intention. But what the combination, if you're talking about using these modalities, like literally at the same time, because our light is safe and substance free, you can really use the least amount of substance medicine to get the greatest therapeutic outcome. And I think that, as we're scaling and talking about, how we're going to be prescribing treatment, the opportunity to kind of amplify the psychedelic experience because currently, for example, in MDMA trials, it's not uncommon to have like a booster dose throughout your experience. Well, now if we can use light instead, then again, you're able to use the least amount of substance. But, just like set and setting is so underrated and underexplored, likewise, integration of any experience, whether it be substance-free, substance-full, is imperative. And so with our technology, and again, we're working to really create programs so that you can easily, either in a clinical setting or from home, because we do have a home portal version of our technology as well. Again, not only for people who are new to the psychedelic experience, it's invaluable to be able to test the waters, right? To know that there is literally an off switch gives a level of control that, interestingly enough, actually allows the user to let go and surrender more deeply into the experience, just knowing that you're not strapped in for 8 hours. And again, let's say that you're using a set microdosing protocol. If you prime your system previously with the, like we were talking about, with the intention, using this time, if you're working with a therapist, to build a rapport and a relationship, to witness, and I'm a big believer in what we're working with in our community as well, is incorporating wearable technology so that we can really quantify, how you are responding in these altered states, what the different variables, the 5 senses, however you're personalizing, what the real effects are. And then, again, integrating after your experience as well. If we don't take that step, then our brains are naturally just going to revert back to whatever is most deeply ingrained. So ultimately, you risk losing any benefits that you've seen in your microdosing experience because you're not taking the time to reinforce those new patterns. And they'll only last for so long that way. So it's about taking the experience and translating it and integrating it into your daily life. That's really where the healing occurs, because otherwise you're just witnessing an experience.
Right, rather than actually experiencing, which is truly where the healing occurs, as you said, and that's where the change within you can happen. And you could serve as that catalyst with this technology, which is so cool. What's next for Lucid Holistics, for Lucia Cell? Like, what do you want to, where do you want to see this go? Do you want to see this, of course, in more doctors' offices? But like you said, you're trying to bring it into the homes of people. You're utilizing it more with wearable technology. So is this the kind of the direction you'd love to see all of this go in? More acceptance?
I mean, absolutely. And the way that we are looking to implement this technology, I'm very excited because we are launching both a for-profit and not-for-profit. The not-for-profit focusing, like I said before, on validating the efficacy of our technology here in the US with US target populations, specifically sensitive US populations, so that we can become an effective validated tool and really then integrate into the infrastructure of a new holistic mental health and medical paradigm. So it all starts with the validation studies, right? The feasibility studies, and where we're unique, and it's an incredible opportunity. We do, even though we are just launching, we're about to launch our very first pilot study, which I can elaborate on, using wearable technology to our existing light community. But the feasibility studies that we're currently seeking to finance and then execute, we're really just replicating studies that have been done globally, again, here using our US population. So it's wonderful because we kind of do have the security of like, hey, the proof of concept is happening globally. We're just a little bit behind on our consciousness research here in the US. But, the vision that I have specifically of returning to our, especially the mental health crisis, right? And implementing this technology, not just for the patients, but for the practitioner ethics, for training practitioners as we're looking to scale psychedelic therapy. This is already happening using our technology in Europe. And so again, it's just a matter, first of all, right now, of literally just executing those feasibility studies so that we can continue on and just scale up. Additionally, like I said before, I'm really excited to start collaborating with the existing psychedelic infrastructure and implementing our community as what's referred to as the pollination approach for psychedelic science, right? So we're essentially already a global community of light practitioners, and we're working to create aligned education, right? So that anybody who is interested in, especially entering the psychedelic space for the first time, but also, of course, those who have their own previous experiences, we want to be aligned with the most validated, trusted, up-to-date education so that we can, provide globally a psychedelic experience. And again, like I said before, an opportunity for people to be representatives or pollinators of psychedelic science without needing the credentials of being an actual trained therapist. And in this way, like I said, we can bring the opportunity for anyone, no matter if they're experiencing psychedelics in a clinical setting or if they're using them in their own personal way. You can find a Lucia practitioner to do this integration and preparation that we're talking about. And additionally, again, what I hope to see very soon is using our technology in a clinical setting as well for screening, because ultimately what at the end of the day I see as the highest potential is our ability to improve safety. It's all about harm reduction for the patient and doing it in an ethical way. And that in terms of where we are currently as an organization, it's such an exciting time because we're on the precipice of this new evolving space, right? And it is a little bit of the Wild West, but at the same time, it's this opportunity where we truly are dictating the future, right? And so that's why my whole mission is getting aligned funding that, isn't sacrificing any of the ethical standpoints that we've talked about, so that we can be a validated, substance-free tool to help responsibly scale, now. We need to get the infrastructure right as soon as possible, so that, again, all of these validated, effective tools that we so desperately need can be here to stay.
Yeah, no, it's such an important mission. I love that you're providing these options for these really critical issues that are around right now. You're taking these ancient proven techniques, putting that modern spin, allowing it to be accessible, proving it, and putting that time into doing that. That's what, for us in our clinic, it took so many years for us to try and prove it in a sense, and put out that information and make sure we were doing it correctly. Because you could have just started and said, hey, this is going to revolutionize everything. And, if you don't have the proof behind it, if you don't have the science, the people there that have actually experienced it and got better, then that's everything, I think, in medicine. You could talk a big game like a lot of people do, but those companies come and go. And in medicine, you get eaten up quick if you don't have results, unless you got billions of dollars, maybe. Then it's a little different, as we know, with the big pharma. But this is, really a wonderful approach. So can you let us know and let all the people know, where can they learn more about yourself, Lucid Holistic, Lucia #3, all of this? Where can they go to find more?
Absolutely. So my website, lucidholistics.com, that's where you'll find more information about myself, but also, again, more specifically, if you are interested in working, and we can do some of these options remotely as well, just the ancient practices and modern technologies that I use, that I promote with my clients. And then as well, you'll find a link there to our 501c3, which goes into greater detail on, again, the clinical research side. This is our nonprofit that's dedicated to the scientific validation that, like you just said, is imperative in being an effective tool.
Great. And I'm going to link up to everything also, so when people go to the page, they can find it easily. Jessica, thank you so much for this, for sharing your story, and for pushing forward and kind of forging ahead after you already experienced healing, to then share this with the world, because that's really what's most important. Is your own healing story is amazing, but it continues by helping and paying it forward to help others. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Casper, for saying those kind words, and also for this platform, because, again, ultimately, the ability for me to share what was my experience is an opportunity to hopefully prevent people from having to go through unnecessary suffering. And at the end of the day, so much of the suffering that we're experiencing in the world right now is absolutely unnecessary. And I feel, is my responsibility, and all of our responsibility, for those of us who are in a position where we can, contribute and make a change for those who are suffering too greatly in the present moment. I firmly believe that I survived my experience to land right here in my soul's true purpose, and I see the potential of my own personal impact, and that's what drives me forward in allowing everyone to discover not only their unlimited potential, but their true purpose. So thank you.
Love that. Beautiful message to end it on. Thank you.